If you walked into the Louvre in Paris or the Met in New York 5 years ago, you would see one name carved in stone: the Sackler wing. It was a name associated with art, science, and philanthropy. They were the American Medicis, a dynasty of doctors and philanthropists. They gave millions to museums, universities, and hospitals. But behind the gold letters and the gala dinners, there was a dark secret. The Sackler fortune was not built on saving lives. It was built on addiction. This family is responsible for the greatest man-made epidemic in modern history: the opioid crisis, a plague that has killed over 500,000 Americans. That is more than World War II, Vietnam, and the Afghanistan War combined. And they didn't do it by accident. They did it by design. They created a marketing machine so aggressive it turned doctors into drug dealers. And when the bodies started piling up, they didn't stop. They doubled the dose. This is the story of how three brothers turned a small medicine company into a Death Star. It is the story of a pill called OxyContin, and it is the story of how a family became billionaires by convincing the world that pain was a disease, and that heroin in a pill was the cure. Let's go back to Brooklyn, 1952. The story starts with three brothers: Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler. They were children of Jewish immigrants. They were brilliant. All three of them became psychiatrists. But Arthur Sackler was different. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a genius of persuasion. While working at a mental hospital, he realized something that changed medicine forever. He realized that you shouldn't just sell medicine to patients, you should sell it to the doctors. In the 1950s, medical advertising was boring. It was just dry statistics. Arthur Sackler changed the game. He brought the tactics of madmen into medicine. He created flashy ads. He hired expensive artists. He practically invented the modern pharmaceutical marketing industry. In 1952, the brothers bought a small, struggling patent medicine company. It was called Purdue Frederick. Later, it would become Purdue Pharma. For decades, they were a quiet success. Arthur made a fortune marketing Valium. He became one of the richest men in America, collecting art and donating to museums. Arthur died in 1987. He never saw the monster his company would create. But he left his brothers and his nephew, Richard Sackler, with the blueprint. In the 1990s, Purdue Pharma was looking for a new cash cow. Their patent on a morphine pill for cancer patients was expiring. They needed a replacement, something they could sell to everyone. Not just to people dying of cancer, but to people with backaches and knee pain. They developed a drug called OxyContin. The active ingredient was oxycodone, a chemical cousin of heroin. Oxycodone wasn't new. Doctors knew it was powerful and addictive. They were terrified of prescribing it for common pain. So Purdue had to invent a story, a technological lie. They created a Contin coating, a time-release mechanism. They claimed that because the pill dissolved slowly over 12 hours, it did not give the user a euphoric high. Therefore, they argued, it was less addictive. Richard Sackler, Arthur's nephew, was the driving force. He wanted to launch big. In 1995, they got the FDA to approve a label that changed history. The label said, "Delayed absorption is believed to reduce the abuse liability." Believed to? 2 words. There were no long-term studies to prove this. But the FDA approved it anyway. Why? The FDA examiner who approved the label later left the government. 2 years later, he was working for Purdue Pharma. With the approval in hand, the Sacklers unleashed the most aggressive marketing campaign in pharma history. They didn't just run ads, they bought the medical profession. They hired thousands of sales reps, young, attractive, hungry salespeople. They offered them insane bonuses. Some reps were making more than the doctors they visited. Their mission was to convince doctors that opioids are not addictive. They had charts, they had brochures, they had the statistic, less than 1%. They told doctors, if you treat pain properly, the rate of addiction is less than 1%. This statistic was based on a tiny letter to an editor from 1980, not a real study. But Purdue cited it as gospel. They flew doctors to luxury resorts in Florida and Arizona for pain conferences. They paid for the flights, the hotels, the golf, and the steaks. All the doctors had to do was listen to a lecture about OxyContin. They created a new concept. Pain is the fifth vital sign. They argued that doctors were cruel if they didn't treat pain aggressively. If a patient said, "I hurt," you didn't ask questions. You gave them a pill, and it worked. Sales exploded. By 2001, OxyContin sales hit $1 billion a year. The Sackler family was earning unimaginable wealth. But almost immediately, the lie began to crumble. The time-release coating was a joke. Addicts figured it out in seconds. If you crushed the pill, the time-release mechanism broke. You could snort it. You could inject it. You got the full 12-hour dose of heroin-strength narcotic in 1 second. It hit rural America first, Appalachia, Maine, Ohio. Towns were devastated. Crime rates soared. Pharmacies were robbed. Teenagers were dying of overdoses at parties. Grandmothers were getting hooked after hip surgery, Purdue Pharma knew. Internal emails show they knew about the abuse as early as 1996. Sales reps reported that pills were being sold in parking lots. Doctors were writing prescriptions for hundreds of pills at a time. These were pill mills. Clinics that were just drug dealerships. Purdue had a database of these doctors. They knew who was overprescribing. Did they call the police? No. They called the sales reps and told them to sell more to those specific doctors. Richard Sackler, now the president of the company, sent chilling emails. When reports of overdoses came in, he didn't blame the drug. He blamed the victims. He wrote, "We have to hammer on the abusers in every way possible. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals." This was the strategy. Demonize the addicts to protect the pill. In 2007, the federal government finally struck. They charged Purdue Pharma with misbranding the drug. They had evidence that Purdue lied about the addictiveness. It seemed like the end. But the Sacklers had high-priced lawyers. They negotiated a plea deal. The company paid a $600 million fine. 3 executives pleaded guilty to misdemeanors, but not a single Sackler was charged. Their names were kept out of the court documents. To a family worth billions, $600 million was just a speeding ticket. They paid it and went right back to business. In fact, they hired a consulting firm, McKinsey, to boost sales even further. McKinsey advised them to turbocharge the sales. They suggested targeting mothers and veterans. They even suggested giving rebates to insurance companies for every overdose. Think about that. A rebate for an overdose. The greed was sociopathic. As the years went on, the death toll became impossible to ignore. The pills ran out for many users. When the doctors stopped prescribing, the patients turned to the street. They switched to heroin, then to fentanyl. The opioid crisis shifted, but the Sacklers had lit the match. By 2017, public outrage reached a boiling point. Journalists and lawyers started digging. They found the emails. They found the marketing plans. Artist Nan Goldin, who survived addiction, started protesting in museums. She threw pill bottles into the fountain at the Met. She staged die-ins at the Guggenheim. She shamed the museums into taking down the Sackler name. Suddenly, the American Medicis were pariahs. Museums in London, Paris, and New York rejected their money. Massive lawsuits were filed, not just against the company, but against the family. States aimed to bankrupt them, but the Sacklers were one step ahead. For years, they had been quietly taking money out of the company. Between 2008 and 2017, the family transferred over $10 billion from Purdue to their private offshore accounts. They emptied the company vault, so when the lawsuits hit, Purdue Pharma filed for bankruptcy. It was a strategic move. The bankruptcy court halted all lawsuits against the family members. The Sacklers proposed a settlement. They offered to pay $4.5 billion over 9 years. It sounds like a lot. But remember, they had taken out over $10 billion. They would still be richer after paying the fine than they were before. And the most controversial part? They demanded global immunity. They wanted a legal shield that would prevent anyone from ever suing them again, civilly, criminally, forever. They wanted to buy their freedom. In court hearings, members of the family were forced to listen to victims. Mothers cried over photos of their dead sons. Richard Sackler sat there, stone-faced. When asked if he felt any responsibility for the crisis, He said one word: no. He said, the company did nothing wrong. The product is effective. He refused to apologize. The judge approved the bankruptcy plan. The Sackler family would lose their company. They would pay billions, but they would keep billions more, and they would admit no wrongdoing. However, the Supreme Court and other judges have intervened. The battle over their immunity is still ongoing. But as of today, not a single member of the Sackler family has spent a day in jail. They are still in their mansions in Connecticut, France, and Florida. They are still billionaires. Meanwhile, 130 Americans die every day from opioid overdoses. The legacy of OxyContin is not over. It is seen in the homeless camps in Philadelphia. It is seen in the foster care system, overwhelmed with orphans. It is seen in the cemeteries of small towns across America. The Sackler name has been chiseled off the walls of the Louvre. But it is permanently carved into the history of American tragedy. This was not medicine. This was a heist. They traded 500,000 lives for a bank account in Switzerland. And the terrifying part is, it worked. They proved that if you kill enough people and make enough money, the law doesn't apply to you. You don't get handcuffs, you get a settlement, and you get to keep the change. The next time you see a pill bottle, remember the Sacklers. Remember that in the business of pain, the patient is not the customer. The patient is the product, and the profit margins are to die for.